Some of you may know Casey from Whistle Sports, but today we're going to get a bit more personal and talk about the topic of depression. Throughout Casey's life, she's had different periods of time where depression has ebbed and flowed. And for today, we're going to talk about those different moments and how depression is more of a grayscale than it is black and white. Casey, welcome to Turtzed.
Thank you.
I am so excited to have you here today.
Me too.
And I think that the connection between us, that your sister and I were in group therapy together, is just the cherry on top for the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yes. I need to get in group therapy, I think. She just had an amazing experience with you.
It was one of those things where with group therapy, it's hard to explain if you haven't done it, but it's just an experience where your triggers play out with a group, but it's a safe space where you grow to trust the group of people that are there. And each person triggers another person in a different way, and you have to work through it. And I think for me, I struggled interpersonally, which we'll talk about today, but it was a really safe space to play that out and work through those triggers so that in my everyday life, if I felt like I was getting anxious or upset or angry or having these outsized emotions, I was able to identify it, know that it was a trigger, and kind of relate back to group and have that sort of calming experience of knowing that this is a bigger emotion than it probably is warranted, and to take a breath.
Right. Yeah, she told me some of the conversations that were had, and just the brash honesty and transparency with each other. It doesn't work like that in the real world. So it's just a different atmosphere.
Yeah. It actually, that's such an interesting point, because I think that in that environment, everything else goes away. There's not the interpersonal connections. There's not the feeling of for me, I think about things deeply. We've talked about that as well, and we're going to talk about it today, but you can't hide from it. It's an hour and a half. You go back the next week. If you didn't finish talking about it, you're talking about it the next week. So
we're going to beat a dead horse.
We are going to figure this out.
We're going to talk about it, yeah.
So for today, I want to dive in more to looking at depression as that grayscale. I think a lot of people look at depression as a black and white. You're either depressed or you're not depressed. And I think from my experience and what we've discussed today, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about how it ebbs and flows and how it can change with different life circumstances and different things can affect it. And so before we dive into that, I'd love to just start with when did you first realize that you might have a bit of depression?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited to talk about depression. I will probably bring it up in like most conversations I have casually in the last year or two, just because I feel like it should be more of just thrown into casual conversations.
Totally agree.
But I would say in high school, after I dated this guy for about 6 months, it was my first time in a relationship, high school relationship, if it really counts. But he was my first and everything. So obviously it's like, there's a lot of chemicals there. And just when you love at a young age, you don't have all your guards up, right? So you just love big. And when he broke up with me, it just destroyed my world. And I would come home from school at 2:15, immediately go upstairs to my room to go take a nap. I'd sleep for 4 hours. And that was like consistently every single day for probably a year. And then it still carried into senior year, into college. And I think college was when I really was like, okay, this is, I didn't even date him 6 months. And it like fucked me up, So every day was just kind of Groundhog Day. It was very similar. And I was like, all right, I got to figure out like medicine or something, because I don't know. I don't think this is normal compared to heartbreak.
Yeah. And I think I can definitely relate to that. And I think a lot of times when it starts at a young age, for me at least, I didn't realize that I was having symptoms of depression or having periods that I was depressed when I was younger until I had that first real heartbreak and then the floodgates opened. When you were growing up, when you were in high school before you had this relationship, did you have any of those similar experiences to, wanting to sleep for 4 hours at the end of a day or needing to almost rest after being around people for a full school day?
I was always an introvert, but I did so much. I'd played so many sports. I was in so many extracurriculars. So I just was going nonstop. And obviously when you're busy going, you just don't really have time to think or process emotions. So I'm sure I probably felt it at points, but it just seems so long ago. And it's when I think back to when it really started to show up daily was in high school, was at the end of high school. But I think it's been in my bloodstream for forever.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you were experiencing that, but didn't necessarily realize that there was a problem until later.
Yes.
What did you sort of, when you had that aha moment, like, okay, maybe I need to talk to someone or I need help in some way.
Yeah.
What was sort of that journey like to get to that point where you realized this isn't what I would want to consider normal?
Right. So I think I was building my resume in college. So I did internships and I did the coolest internships. Like if you look at my resume, people are like, how is this even real? Because I was working on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. That was a very New York experience. Like I was running around doing his dry cleaning, taking his iPhone to the Apple store. And then I worked in Rio for the Olympics in 2016. Worked at the NBA as an intern in the photos department in New Jersey, Secaucus. And I think after doing all these really, really cool things, I still felt like there's just this baseline depression, I would say. It's like, it doesn't matter what I do, how I do it, how cool it is. It's like, I just always feel very flatline, you know, like nothing. I have high highs and low lows, but it's mostly low lows. And I think in those moments too, I would hide from people because I didn't want to be seen in that light. So obviously when you self-isolate in those moments, it just snowballs and gets worse and worse. And I remember like in college, you know, a lot of people liked being around me. They liked hanging out with me, liked me as a person, but it's because I kept them at a very far distance. And I give amazing first impressions. and then after that, it's like I pull away because it's like I don't want to be seen past that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think from that standpoint, I mean, there's so many things there. Just from the last thing that you said, you make that really great first impression. You have a great energy. And then sort of pulling away keeps the guard up and leaves that great first impression.
Yes.
Do you feel like when you're in that moment and you're giving that great first impression that you're excited in the moment, similar to, you know, doing cool things with Jimmy Fallon or the Olympics, but then the minute sort of you leave that moment, you're analytically thinking about everything that just happened?
Yeah, I think I have moments of happiness and moments of joy, and I do really value those and appreciate those because they're more rare than not. And even I was hanging out with a couple of friends the other day, and I told them, because I'm very open about it now, but I told them, I'm like, I actually really am enjoying this with you guys and being here. And I'm not thinking about when I get to go home and be by myself. Like I'm genuinely just happy to be here and existing and enjoying this. Because yeah, the minute I'm not around people, I'm in my own head and it's a dark place to be.
When you leave a group and you go home and you're recharging, are you clearing your head in terms of, it could be reading, watching TV, listening to music, or do you more sit and think about sort of the experience that you just had and ruminate in it?
Ruminate. I think it's changed so much as I've gotten older. And even in my last breakup in the last couple of months, I've definitely found healthier ways to clear my mind. And I journal a lot, meditate, I do hot yoga.
I love that.
But before, it was just scrolling for hours. Just to be, I sleep a lot. I sleep a lot. Like in the last couple of months, you know, it's been better, but that's definitely my like escape. Is I'm a big napper. You know, I can nap for 3 hours in the afternoon, and people are like, "How are you going to go to bed?" I'm like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Don't worry about me." Yeah. So I think scrolling is also just you could be on Reddit for hours, and then the time goes by, and it's like I was reading other people's stories and didn't have to think about my life. And
yeah, you sort of escape through stories. I didn't necessarily do Reddit, but I definitely at periods of my life where there were times that I just couldn't handle any more inputs socially. I would just get lost in a series, and the more seasons, the better. And I'd also find that if there was a particular storyline within that show that resonated with something going on in my life, I would be crying on the couch, but not necessarily realize that it was replicating something that I was struggling with personally. So it was very interesting to, as you've said, sort of have a shift and be able to look at it a little bit differently. I want to go back to college, and you had these internships, and you were having these incredible experiences over the summer. When you were going back to school from those experiences, how was that transition for you?
People talk about college being the best 4 years of their life. Disagree. We all have a different experience, but I played volleyball at Wilmington my freshman year, and I went from being, all-star in high school and then riding the bench, not really playing in college. So that was obviously new for me. And then thinking about, after college, could I make a career out of volleyball? Probably not. So I was like, let me just be more mindful of my time. So that's when I quit freshman year, and then I joined a sorority for a semester. Those girls were really awesome. I had a great experience with them, but I ended up transferring into my junior year. So I was 2 years at Wilmington and then 2 years at Carolina. And obviously transferring your junior year is a whole, you're getting to the school at the point where all these people have made their connections and friendships. They have their groups, their core people. And I'm already like an introvert outsider. So I'm not really making the biggest effort to meet people and make new friends. Right. So I was 2.5 hours from home. I went home probably, I want to say like every weekend, because my sister just had a baby. So my nephew, my best friend, and I would just drive home to see him every weekend.
It's interesting because what you just described almost replicates your great first impression when you first meet someone. Yeah. So you did volleyball, right? Did that, had that season, and then pulled back. You did the sorority. You did the first sort of 2 years at a college, did a transfer, and then obviously graduated college from a different school, and then transitioned to working. You sort of created that, obviously during longer periods of time, but recreated that dynamic of the first impression, making a great first impression, and then pulling back.
Totally.
As you started your work career, that's more permanent, right? You're hopeful that you'll stay at a job for an extended period of time, and there's interpersonal dynamics. When you look at the difference between college, where you could self-isolate, you could go to a class, you could go back to your dorm room, you could really do everything you needed to do in a bubble. When you entered the work environment, what was that transition like for you?
I just feel for the girl in college, because it was almost too easy to isolate and escape, because it's like the last semester I only had to get a certain amount of credits, and that's like maybe one class Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning. Totally. And then after that, especially like with depression, I'm sleeping, I'm going to Burger King after class, like gross. And then just wasting days. And when I went to, and also with internships, it's like there's a cutoff. So 3 months, like y'all are going to be blown away. This is going to be amazing. 3 months.
It's your first impression.
It's my first impression. And then getting into the real world, it was like I have to show up, every single day with these people. If I make a mistake, I have to face them. If there's confrontation, like there has to be resolution and moving past that. And that was something like I wasn't as comfortable with either. So it was totally different dynamic, but it's almost like when I'm forced in that environment, I thrive, you know, because it's like once I'm around people, I do well.
Yeah.
And I feel better. I feel lighter. It's just getting me there.
Yeah.
And one of the only things that's required is like showing up to work every day.
Yep.
Right. So that was huge for me in that moment because I was around people all the time. Like I barely spent time in my apartment, right? It's New York. You're just nonstop, go, 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 creating beautiful friendships. I was in my young 20s. So going out after work, staying out late, waking up early, taking the subway to work. Like it was just amazing.
So when you think about that period in your life compared to the period earlier where you could self-isolate and almost hold the depression in a way that made you feel safe versus being pushed outside of your comfort zone, for me, I always found that in therapy, I would be sitting there saying, I wish I could be the person I am at work in my personal life.
Yeah.
Because I was totally different.
Yeah.
What I know for me, it was a feeling of it's not really me, it's a business. What was it for you that allowed you to sort of come out of your shell and enjoy that experience in a different way and have longer periods of time that you could go without needing the rest and recharge?
Right. So when I left the NBA, one of my coworkers said, you are the perfect combination of personal and professional. And I just thought that was the best compliment I've ever received because I think I love people. I love getting to know people. I love getting deep, vulnerable with people and seeing them because obviously it's like when you're not able to be seen, you experience that feeling and you want others to like feel that safety. So I think that was the biggest thing was I was able to obviously keep a level of professionalism, but befriend these people. Like some people keep it very corporate, personal, like very separate, but let's go walk around Midtown and get coffee. And I want to hear about your family and your life and your background. So it was just, and a couple of them have moved out here to LA and they're my brothers, sisters, like best friends. So I'm really grateful for the relationships I was able to get there. And I think another thing is I'm good at building relationships, again, forced at work. Like those people I'm around every day. So obviously it was easier to make those relationships. But if I'm on my own and the responsibility is on me, I'm hiding, not being social, not going out.
It's interesting because you phrased it in a very specific way. You got to know all about them. How much did they get to know about you?
That's my secret sauce. I'm a great listener. I ask questions and I've heard this somewhere, but you leave a conversation. Someone said, if you just ask them a bunch of questions, they'll leave feeling like it was the best conversation ever.
You made it about them.
Yeah.
It's like rule number one of
right.
sales.
Rule number one. And I'm not even in sales.
It just caught me because the minute you said that, I related so much to it because for me, one of the things that I struggled with as a leader at work was that I gave my team everything. I gave them every ounce, everything I could possibly do to make sure that they succeeded. But I did not let them get to know me.
Yeah.
And there were points where I took on additional responsibilities in terms of territory and people that I was managing. And that actually forced me to create even less of a connection personally, where I didn't even really have time to get to know them as well as I should have because I had so much responsibility. It was all about the work. And I remember a very specific point where I had gotten feedback that they wanted to get to know me and there were things going on in my life with my grandparents. And I just remember saying to my boss, I literally go to work every day and say, do I help them succeed or do I become their friend? Because I felt like if I have 15 minutes with someone, I need to help them close a deal. Getting to know them comes second because I wanted them to succeed. And I was able to hide behind that.
Yeah.
And so the minute you said that, I was like, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you've maintained those relationships. As you've said, things have started to change in, let's say, the last 3 to 6 months. have those relationships changed as well, where they're getting to now know you more?
Yeah, I think one thing is I feel like that's such a shame that they didn't get to know you, because in the few conversations I've talked to you, I'm like, we're best friends now at this point. You're just such a warm human. So it's like, it's disappointing that they weren't able to get that opportunity. But yeah, my friendships with them now, I have, like I said before, become so much more open and transparent with them. And I'll call, if I need somebody, I'll call them. If I need to talk to someone, I'll FaceTime them. And obviously there's a point where, you can't do it every day, right? It's like you can't lean on everybody all the time. You have to save yourself. Like, it's your job. It's your responsibility at the end of the day. But it's amazing how when I reach out to them, it's a 20, 30-minute FaceTime conversation, and I'm telling them how I'm feeling, and I'm in this dark space, and I feel like I just don't see hope and light at the end of the tunnel, and they're receptive. Like, they have their own struggles. And maybe they're not as deep as I am, or they don't have depression themselves, but they're still human. They're still my people. So they're happy to listen.
How do they react when you share your struggles? Because they are deep, in our short conversation, we shared a lot, and I've been through a lot myself. But for someone who hasn't necessarily experienced that, they give you so much in listening and make you feel heard, and that in itself can bring you out of a darker space. What has that experience been like when you started opening up and sharing, and people's reaction?
Well, they look at me differently, like as more fragile and sensitive, because obviously I like to be funny, sarcastic, like roast people. I like when my friends roast me. But I remember talking to my one friend, Daniel, and I was just telling him, like, did you know that I was like this sad? And he's like, honestly, I didn't realize until recently. So it was kind of like having that conversation. And now when I call him and I'm upset, it's not like this groundbreaking thing. Yeah, it's not a shock. It's like, okay, let's talk about it, And then even my friend Trey, best friend, he lives in New York. So it's like we FaceTime often. But I remember I called him and was crying and just like so desperate for someone to talk to me and see me. And we talked for 20, 30 minutes. And then he's like, all right, well, you need to, get outside, like get some sunlight, go take a walk. And I'm like, all right, when I hang up with you, I'll go change and like go outside. He's like, no, I'll stay on the phone with you until you're outside. And so I went and changed and got outside. And then I was like, all right, I'm out. And he hung up. And I just thought, I don't give people enough credit. I really don't. Like, people will show up for you. They can show up for you. They will show up for you if they love you. And I think I just have always felt that I equate like my emotions with shame. So I just don't want to burden anybody with those emotions. I don't want to put on anyone else. I don't want to bring my cloud anywhere near anybody else. And in doing that, it's like I'm depriving them of the opportunity to be there for me. Yeah. Right? And that's like the best part of interpersonal relationships, is that vulnerability with each other.
That's such an interesting point in terms of sharing your emotions and opening up as a practice from feeling shame around having those emotions. In my head, when you were talking about it, I was also thinking, when did you first put on the mask of this bubbly, outgoing person? And so I'd be curious, in the combination of the two, when did you put on the mask of this great first impression maker? And when did you also start feeling shame around your emotions?
I think the mask has always been there. And like high school, I was homecoming queen, super athletic, player of the year, volleyball, basketball. And I think I was popular because I was nice, fun to be around. But I was like disconnected from people. It's not like I had a core group of people, friends. Wasn't involved in any drama because I'm like just doing my own thing. And yeah, mask it's very, I think that's why I feel very deeply when I'm alone. It's because like you get in the car, you get back home after.
Well, you weren't seen because
Yeah,
you were
yeah.
seen as the person you wanted them to see,
Yes.
but it wasn't authentic. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah.
That's your way of protecting yourself.
Totally.
But it's hard to leave full if you're not showing up in your full authentic self.
Yes, exactly. And then the second question you had, which I have forgotten.
Right? They were two pretty heavy questions.
Yeah,
when did you first start feeling shame around your emotions?
oh, so I actually, when I listened to your first podcast, I just thought you're so eloquent and good with your words. And I think I've struggled with articulating how I feel. And you're 10 years into your journey. I feel like I'm newly into the journey of reading, looking for resources, talking to my therapist and trying to understand things and put vocabulary and labels.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually just recently, talking to my therapist, realized, she's like, have you always felt these deep of emotions since you were a child? And I said, yeah, for sure. And so she told me a book I should read. And it's basically, if you had these heavy emotions, which we all do when you're young, and you are not giving the space to feel them fully, and, it's just like, stop crying, it's fine, throwing everything under the rug, then you equate those feelings with shame. So when you do feel it, it's just like you condense even more. And I realized even the 95% of my personality that's amazing, that's fun, that's loving, caring, kind, I only focus on the 5%. That's the darkness, the depression. And that 5% makes me unlovable. You know what I mean? It's like, even though I have all this, I still have that. And that's just, no one wants to deal with that.
Yeah. It's hard because, to your point, it's not necessarily a big percentage, but it almost feels like the light is on that.
Yep.
And when you're not in a place where your emotions have been validated and you've been able to work through them. And I think that's one of the things that group therapy really taught me, was to work through my emotions and that they're okay. And if someone loves you and you love them, you can work through it. That is very difficult, to take the spotlight off that 5% and move it to the 95%.
Yeah.
I think, as you were saying that, it brought me back to something you said in the beginning about conflict resolution. And it's one thing to not feel happy and all these other things, but when it comes to conflict resolution and you're talking about not feeling your emotions, if you were to have conflict within a relationship or dating or friendship, and you said it in reference to work, how would you handle conflict personally? And we can talk about work in a second, but in a personal relationship, whether it's dating or friendship?
I shut down. I think that any type of conflict is like an attack on me. It makes me very sensitive. It makes me feel like I'm not good enough. It makes me question who I am as a person in totality. And I've had a lot of experiences with friends where there is conflict and there is no resolution. Like, because for me, I think I have to protect my peace. I can cut people off because I am fragile. And it's like, if I don't see them fitting into my life, I don't need to give them an explanation. I don't need to have a conversation. It's just like, it's on me.
Yeah.
And I think that's because my parents, they would fight all the time and then just sweep it under the rug. Like, there was never a moment where they're fighting and then I saw them like come together and kiss and hug and like talk it out. There was no resolution ever.
It's really difficult as a child, speaking from my own personal experience, to even have a fight with a parent and wake up the next day and have no one talking about it.
Yes.
And not the resolution is that it's a new day is not a resolution.
Yeah.
And I think
it's the weirdest thing.
It not talking about it is very difficult. And the older you get, it's even harder to talk about, and something I still struggle with today. But I had the same conflict resolution. I had a friend once say on the phone to me when we were having a difficult moment, I'm not hanging up the phone, because if I hang up the phone with you, I will never speak to you again.
Wow.
And I literally, in that moment, was so angry, and somehow them saying that kept me on the phone.
Yep. You felt seen.
I felt seen, and it was still hard to get over that moment. But I know that that person cares, because they know me well enough to know
that's huge.
that is what I would do.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
it was sort of in a period of my life when I was going back to people that I had cut off or stopped talking to because I was hurt. And I cut off a lot of people when I was depressed, and in my darkest moment, I had no one around because I didn't want anyone around.
Yep.
And it's those people that I've gone back to and apologized for what I've done, because they were good people, and I couldn't accept their love if I couldn't love myself. And I think that when you're talking about starting your journey and working on these things, like, the one thing I would say is that the way that you were surprised in how people reacted when you shared the deeper stuff, how you were struggling, I had the same surprise when I would go back and have those conversations and was truly honest about how I was feeling and why I was feeling that way. And a lot of the times it was more on me than it was them,
Right.
or they triggered something from my past. But you can always reopen a door, and you'd be surprised, because you don't know what they're thinking or what's on the other side of it. It's what you said earlier.
Yes.
No one's thinking about you. They're thinking
Yes.
about themselves. That's how we are as humans. And so when you talk, the minute you said conflict resolution, or we were talking about conflict resolution, and you shared there would never be a resolution.
Yeah.
That's very hard to learn, because to your point, you have to be vulnerable, and you have to share authentically how you were feeling. Otherwise, there's not really a point in going back. But I will tell you, going back, those are some of my strongest relationships. And that also happened in group, where I got to a point I couldn't handle it, and I said I needed a break. And I didn't think I would ever be able to go back. And I accidentally popped into a group, because it was virtual at the time, but I was doing an in-person session. So I was just saying hi, and I never left. And I stayed with it.
Was that where you met Kat?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we were in that group, but I had left that group because I felt like I was bad and I was too much. And I had this
too much.
sort of 4-week break where I said, I'm stepping away because I don't want to mess this up for everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the first experiences that allowed me to go back to other people, because I saw how accepting they were when I owned my part in it, and also just explained how I was feeling.
Yeah. I think I have experienced that recently, because I went through a breakup at the end of last year, and obviously it's like the depression and then the heartbreak. Your girl was down bad. And I cut a lot of people off in that moment, and it's not even intentional, right? It's just because I'm in my room. I can't get out of bed. I have to work because I have to work. But if I don't,
you can't take on everyone else's stuff at that moment.
I just couldn't. I couldn't. And in talking to these people months later, when I am feeling better, I think I'm having a hard time explaining myself to people, because it is a heavy emotion, and it's a heavy place to be. And for people to really genuinely understand that and not take it personally is huge. And if you don't feel depression, you can't understand it.
Yeah.
So it's, for them, it's like, okay, well, I can't, fathom that you didn't reach out to me. Like, why wouldn't you reach out to me? And I'm like, you don't understand the space I was in.
Right.
You don't, and I'm trying to tell you, and I'm trying to be transparent and honest, but obviously it's like words are different than if someone were to, okay, well, let me, like, that's why, let me just live stream like
what's
my
going on in
tears.
my life,
yeah, right. Me crying myself to sleep. Like,
Right.
and I think that's what is hard too about being on social media is because people see me very happy and fun, and I like to spread joy and light. But when I do tell people like I struggle with depression, it's very hard for them to comprehend that.
Well, because you put on this mask, people don't really get the duality of it.
Right.
And it's
I'm a complex creature.
We all are.
Yeah,
and I think what you do for a living makes it even more complex because you're on a bigger stage and you're out there. How, when you're feeling that deep depression personally, do you get up, go to work, and put on the show that you need to put on?
High functioning depression. High functioning. I talked to my therapist about this recently, but I do think it's like I just have this baseline depression that I know it's going to be with me for the rest of my life. So it's like you just have to deal and you have to cope. And I think I have big goals, big dreams. I've taken a lot of risks in my life and they've paid off. And I knew that moving to LA would be really hard because I didn't know anybody. And I was depressed for the first 3 years, you know? But I knew I would be depressed, but I knew it would be worth it, you know? So I think I
want to challenge you for a second.
Yes, please.
I used to think that I would be depressed for the rest of my life. And I still go through periods of having depression, and they range. There's little things, there's bigger things. But I think when you look at it from the lens of, to your point, not necessarily having your needs met as a child emotionally, as you put in that work, from my experience, that childhood trauma is always there.
Right.
And reframing it to, this was an experience that you had as a child that not everyone has. And it's hard to understand because it's nuanced and it's emotional and it's damaging. And the more that I have come to understand it, the more I can realize that I'm being triggered into feeling sad because it doesn't relate to the moment, but actually to something as a child.
Right.
And I don't think that I'll ever not have that. And my hope for you is that because we're talking about this now and because you're in therapy and you're putting in the work, that you can get to a point, and not to say that you wouldn't have depression, but the scale at which you have it, you understand yourself better and therefore are able to, when there is a valley, get out of it faster.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really brave of you to talk about all this. And it's really powerful to put words to it because I think that's also really difficult. And you're putting in the work and you're going to therapy. If you were to, in the next 5 years, give yourself a goal with your therapy journey, what would that look like for you?
Ooh, good question. Good question. I think the conflict resolution would be really big for me. God, I just think being able to not be afraid of tough conversations with the people that I love, that is a huge goal for me. And what else? I think it's like I love myself. I love who I am, aside from that little 5%. And I really just want to own all of me, the good, the bad, the ugly, and not hide that piece of me anymore. And I think that's the beautiful thing about being able to have these conversations. And, you know, with COVID and 2020 and the pandemic, and like more people are experiencing these feelings, and maybe they don't equate it to depression, but they're like, something's not right.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, that would be big.
I think for me at least, I mean, I knew your sister, but we jumped on a video call and a 15-minute call turned into a 45-minute call. And it was like we were sharing everything and there was so much connection. And I think that identifying the conflict resolution and that directly relating to the sort of childhood trauma of not having your emotional needs met or seeing the resolution to a conflict, just identifying that is such a huge step and will take you so far with it. And I think, and what I said before, it wasn't to say, you know, you wouldn't have depression or anything like that. I think sometimes reframing it is sort of, to your point, just about like looking at sharing more, right? That it's okay to have these feelings and that people are more understanding. The more we share, the more we can reinforce the reframing of it. And that 5% gets to 4%,
right,
3%,
right,
and then the light's not even on it.
Right.
And it's 2% or 1% and it's there, but you know how you can handle it personally.
Yes. Yes.
From everything we talked about today, what message do you want to leave people with?
I think empathy for people is huge. I carry a lot of empathy, and the world is not black and white. It's always gray. And I've seen that time and time again with different relationships and different people. And, you know, I had one friend who just didn't believe in depression at all. And then went through something.
I wish that I had their life.
What a privilege. What a privilege.
What a privilege to like not
flex.
Believe in depression.
Right.
Like,
humble brag. Yeah, we
great.
get it. Like, we get it. Yeah, to just not know that, it's wild to me. I can't even comprehend that life. But yeah, and then something happened with his health and it put him in a darker place. And then he was like, maybe this is depression. Right? So, which for me, I don't have to experience it for myself to sympathize with you.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who, you know, do, because they just, it's like, you're tough or you're not. You're this or you're that. So I think, empathy, just having empathy for others.
And yourself.
And yourself. And yourself. Yeah.
Because I would imagine that you're also holding yourself to an unbelievably high standard.
Insane. It's insane.
Does that play out at work? And I know that I said final question. What are you going to leave people with? But that just led into this.
No, it's funny because this morning I was on a Zoom call and I don't even remember what I did or said in the meeting, but I ruminated on it after. And then I texted another coworker. I'm like, I'm literally the worst employee ever. And it was just something so minor. But yeah, the standard, it's like, okay, I have to be good in front of the camera and good behind the camera and creative and this and that and pay attention to detail. And it's like, okay, I can't be creative and detail oriented. Like, I can't be both.
Did you have creative. Did you have that pressure as a child?
No. Like, I think I'm so grateful for my mom because she was supportive in anything that I did. You know, she was supportive from a distance. Like, even now, I don't think she couldn't tell you what I do for a living. I don't even know if I could. It's like a little this, a little that. It's very LA. But yeah, I could do whatever I want. And it's like, I always have her full support. So.
With the final question. What is something that someone has said to you that's made an impact in your life and you'll never forget?
Something, people are not thinking about you. People are not thinking about you. I know a lot of people are scared to put themselves out there, right? On even social media now, like this huge fear of what other people will think of them, and they ruminate on it. It prohibits them from doing something they're passionate about, taking a leap of faith, because, what are they going to think of me? They're going to think I'm a loser. They're going to think I'm, stupid for even trying this. Like, it's just so insane to me. I think it's my superpower that I've realized that nobody thinks about you, because the freedom you get with that is just enormous, and it's an incredible feeling. And once you're able to kind of fully understand that and live life like that, you can do anything. Like, fear is not a factor. And everyone's dealing with their own thing. Everyone has their own drama, insecurities, fears. Just nobody is thinking about you. I can't. It's something that I struggle with
personally, just picking up a camera and recording for social media versus all of this. But I guess when you look at the dynamic of your depression and struggling in that part of your life, and you look at putting yourself out on social media, they are pretty diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
How did you rip the Band-Aid off and sort of embrace the no one cares?
Okay, you know what? This is going to sound so dark, but
let's do
appropriate
it.
for this setting. I think it's like the disassociation. It's like I just don't care.
You have nothing to lose.
I have nothing to lose. I don't care about a ton, you know? So it's like, fuck it. I'll post it because who cares?
Yeah.
No one cares. We're living in a simulation, right? Like,
and yet they do, which is the most wonderful part.
Yeah. So it's a superpower. Honestly, I feel very grateful because I'm doing a lot of these things. I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone. I'm doing things that normally would scare me. And obviously it's like I do get nerves and a little anxiety beforehand, but it's still just, we're here. We'll do it.
I love that. And what I want to leave you with today is when we first started, this is the first recording we're doing in a studio, and I was unbelievably nervous for all the cameras and everything else going on around us. And just even starting the intro, adrenaline's racing, very nervous. And you instantly got it. And you could see it, and you knew what to say and how to say it to calm me down.
Yeah.
And I was so appreciative for that today, because I think, to your point, when you have empathy for someone else and you shared your story of where you may struggle with the same thing in a different dynamic, it put me at so much ease that I was like, fuck it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just do it.
And
we're here. Yeah.
I think I will be forever grateful for that, because
I love that.
it was so supportive and reassuring, and it made me significantly less nervous. So thank you.
I love that. You're very welcome. The world's a scary place. Like, we have to just support each other, and we're all going through the same things together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
This was so fun.
It was so wonderful.
First time in a studio.
Yeah,
that's
I love
huge.
it.
Very exciting.
Definitely a different experience, not to be sitting here worried about the mics, the cameras, is everything working, and knowing that it's working. So
that's the privilege of LA life, Hollywood, baby.
Yes. So
Hollywood.
thank you for joining today, and
thank you.
Special shout out to Kat for
love you,
connecting
Kat.
us.
Love you, sis.
Love you.